Hi, I'm Francis Ryan, and I'm a labor historian at Rutgers University. And I'm joining today on the campus of Rutgers here in New Brunswick. And I think it's appropriate to be talking about working class labor history out here in public, because that is where history is made. And I want to talk today about someone that many people might not know his name. His name is Norman Rayford. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Norman Rayford today. Norman Rayford was born in a small town in South Carolina in 1937. And like many African Americans, came up to the North after World War II. And he came with his family and he lived in North Philadelphia. Norman Rayford went to school in Philadelphia and joined the Air Force. And when he came home from his service in the Air Force, he attended Cheyney University. And he then took a position as a porter at a local hospital. And it was his work in the hospitals that really made Norman Rayford's name. Norman Rayford was influenced by the social developments of the 1960s. He was deeply inspired by the civil rights movement and looked to Martin Luther King Jr. as one of his role models. He also looked to Cesar Chavez, who in the late 60s was leading a grape boycott to gain better conditions and wages for farm workers in California. Norman Rayford took a position as an orderly in the hospital because it was one of the few positions that was open to African Americans at that time. Philadelphia was, of course, known as the great workshop of the world, one of the great industrial centers of the United States. But even with this, Philadelphia was a segregated job market. And although there were great industries, many of these industries were cut off to black workers. So Norman Rayford, along with thousands of other black Philadelphians, worked in the hospital systems. These were some of the worst paying jobs in the city. And they were also difficult jobs. These were jobs, as you can imagine, working with sick people, working with bedpans, cleaning rooms and cleaning the laundry on the beds. Some of the most difficult and demanding work. It was the lowest paying work in the economy as well in many cases. Some workers are only making $2 a day. So Norman Rayford believed in the power of ordinary people coming together to work to change their conditions. And in the late 1960s, one of the few areas of Philadelphia that hadn't been organized by the powerful labor movement was the healthcare industry. For years, the healthcare industry was considered unorganizable. It was part of the nonprofit sector. And although great sections of Philadelphia's economy in the construction industry and textiles had been organized since the 1930s, healthcare was outside. This started to change in the 1960s, and the original impetus for this came from New York City. There was a new union that was organized that was starting to make great changes, and this was the National Union of Healthcare and Nursing Home Employees, 1199C. 1199C had no presence in Philadelphia up until the late 60s, when in 1969, a concerted effort to organize the 16,000 healthcare employees in Philadelphia began under the leadership of a man named Henry Nicholas. Henry Nicholas had worked in the hospitals as well and came from Mississippi, where he was born. He came up to Philadelphia and started to organize in the massive healthcare and hospital system, and slowly began to make progress with a small but dedicated group of organizers. I would say that one of the most dedicated of these organizers was Norman Rayford. Norman Rayford understood the conditions that workers faced. He worked those conditions himself, and he believed, looking upon the kind of work that Martin Luther King had done in Memphis, looking at the work that Cesar Chavez was doing in California, that ordinary people could come together and make changes by forming a union. One of the toughest areas to crack, though, were the industrial laundries. These were the laundries that took care of the bed sheets and all the linens that came from the hospitals. These were some of the most difficult jobs you can imagine, and some of the lowest paying as well. Norman Rayford helped organize workers at a place called the Lehigh Valley, or the Delaware Valley Laundry, which serviced a number of hospitals in Philadelphia. Delaware Valley Laundry had about 50 workers employed. Most of them were black women. And they went on strike in the summer of 1972. Norman Rayford helped organize this strike, and he was so dedicated to this mission that when he got married, he and his wife agreed to give all of their monetary gifts that they had from their wedding to the strike fund of these workers. In August of 1972, there was a massive strike in the city that was organized by 1199C, and Norman Rayford was there on the picket lines every single day. And on August 28th, 1972, after dropping his wife off at work, he showed up for the picket lines here at the Delaware Valley Laundry facility. He joined the pickets, but later in the day was confronted by a security guard who, in a confrontation, a verbal confrontation, took out his pistol, and the pistol discharged and shot Rayford in the heart. He died almost instantly. This was a critical moment in the history of 1199C in Philadelphia. Norman Rayford died, and the security guard who shot him was never brought up with charges. And it was clear that this was not an act of self-defense on the part of the security guard. He claimed that Norman Rayford had lunged at him with a knife, but no knife was ever found on Norman Rayford. This, like the moment in Memphis in 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King went down to support the sanitation workers, this was a turning point in the history of that strike. And it brought media attention to the strife, and it also led there to be investigations that brought more media attention to the conditions that workers had. Soon, the 5 laundries that were on strike had an agreement and led to wage increases for the workers there. And I think that we need to remember and center Norman Rayford and remember his name as a critical moment, a critical actor in this strike. 1199C continued organizing, and by 1975 had organized 15,000 workers into one of the most militant and politically active unions in the city. Under Henry Nicholas's leadership, they organized as a bulwark against the administration of Frank L. Rizzo, and was the political opponent to Rizzo through those years. 1199C members gained good contracts, and in memory of Norman Rayford, their great leader and their great man who sacrificed his life for them, have in their contracts August 28th as Norman Rayford Day, and is still celebrated and remembered by members of the union today. And I think that we need to follow their lead and remember Norman Rayford's name, say his name, remember him in our history. It's important that working class people remember our own history, because the corporations are not going to do it for us. They're not going to put it in the textbooks. We have to tell these stories that we learn at work and at home. We need to be proud of them and tell these stories. And that's what I wanted to do today. Let's remember Norman Rayford.